coming up for the combined CERC and merit rounds. So first of all, welcome to St. Joe's for those of you who are not too familiar with St. Joe's, and welcome to our Learning Pillar Week kind of session. The CERC merit rounds started last year, and their collaborative rounds focus on education-based research. And CERC was developed, CERC standing for St. Joe's Education and Research Center, was developed with a focus of doing education-based research as well as supporting learner-based research projects. And so when Jonathan and I met, we thought this would be a wonderful collaboration, and it has been so. So we're keen to get our speakers getting going. So I'll introduce Jonathan, and have Jonathan introduce the speakers.
Thanks, and welcome to everybody who's joining us online as well. You will have an opportunity to engage with the speakers. We have a means by, if you put a question in the chat, we will relay it back to the room here for those who are attending live. I'm Jonathan Charbonneau. I'm the Assistant Dean for Merit. If you're interested in education scholarship, you can find a little bit more about our community, and perhaps you might consider joining our community. We'd be delighted to have you a part of the conversation and to consider some of the scholarship we're producing. You can learn more about us at merit.mcmaster.ca. Before we begin today, we are on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee nations on the lands governed under the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. And so as we consider this idea of mixed methods research today, we should consider the many different ways of knowing and of understanding, and be thoughtful about the traditions that have come before us as we consider how we might take our own questions forward as well. It's my great pleasure to welcome live and in person, and if you are online, that doesn't feel real to you, but for those of us here in the room, our two speakers. The first is Cheryl Poth, and at this moment, I'm regretting not having my glasses with me. Cheryl is a professor in the Center for Research and Applied Management and Evaluation at the University of Alberta. Cheryl has been the visiting professor here with Merit for the last year and a little bit, and will continue moving forward for the next year as she helps to encourage, facilitate, push our community to consider what does mixed methods mean for us in health professions education. We're also super pleased to have with us Sarah Munce, who is a professor in the Institute of Health Policy Management and Evaluation and the Rehabilitation Science Institute at the University of Toronto. Sarah is also the former membership chair for the Mixed Methods International Research Association, and I suspect that Cheryl, who is the past president of that organization, that's where many of their international connections and collaborations stem. You're not here to hear from me much longer. And so I'd welcome both speakers to talk to us about leveraging integration in MMR-based research. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Jonathan, for having us, and for everyone joining us online. Thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with us. We're just really happy to be here. You've heard a little bit about some of our backgrounds and a little bit about how Sarah and I have come to know each other. And even though I'm based out of the University of Alberta, I actually grew up in Southern Ontario. So I'm well versed with the area, as well as the great work that happens here, both at this location and this hospital, as well as at McMaster University. So just wanted to tell you a little bit about what to expect for today. And so you've heard a little bit about us, and now let's talk about what we hope that you can gain from today. We hope to now begin to talk about mixed methods research and to connect it with the value of mixed methods research to your work in the health sciences, and that you leave today's rounds with a better understanding of what it means to do mixed methods research.
Great. Thanks so much, Cheryl, and thanks, Dr. Charbonneau, and the team at Merit for this wonderful invitation. It's a real honor to present here and to present with one of my great mentors. So, you know, certainly there seems to be sort of an ever increasing number of mixed methods studies, you know, across a range of fields in nursing, chiropractic care, palliative care. But I think it really sort of, you know, certainly what Cheryl and I have noticed in various roles, certainly through our courses, is, you know, authentic mixed methods research being practiced, because we don't see a lot of evidence of integration processes and integration products. So, essentially there's a lot of studies that are characterized as mixed methods, but that may fall into the bucket of multiple methods. So we think that that's a really great place to start the conversation. So in terms of the structure for today, we're going to speak for about 40 minutes. We'll pause at various points in our presentation for questions. And then at the end, we'll open the floor and those online for questions and a discussion. Okay, so let's get started.
So one of the ways that Sarah and I have collaborated is in the areas of mentorship, coaching, and building capacity in mixed methods. And so that's definitely an area of interest of ours, as well as what does it mean to do quality or credible mixed methods research? So those are the things that kind of brought us together. But of course, before we can discuss leveraging mixed methods, we really need to build a shared understanding with you about what is it that we mean by mixed methods. And so I want you to notice in this definition, it is the definition that was in the first issue of the Journal of Mixed Methods. And it was meant to kind of get us all started in this way. And there are things that I love about this definition and things that I want to point out that might have evolved now in the last 18 years or so. So a couple of things I want to mention here is that notice that the word integration does appear even then in it. And it does include mixed methods, includes the combination of qualitative with quantitative methodologies, modes or methods of data collection and analysis. So I also think that we're at the place where maybe some of that dichotomy of qualitative and quantitative might be different in the future as we get into the different types of data that is now becoming like social media. People often ask me, is that qualitative or quantitative? And I would say it depends on how you're collecting it and how you're using it. The other piece that I just wanted to mention here is this idea of, I think our understanding of what the possibilities and value of mixed methods is actually goes beyond what is stated here. But this is where we started. We started with the idea of breadth and depth of understanding and a corroboration of a particular phenomenon. I take to issue a little bit the word corroboration because sometimes it's the divergence, to be honest. That is some of the most interesting stuff that happens. Sometimes it's more about the completion of an understanding. And so I just push us to think, both recognize where we were with mixed methods, where we are currently, and where we might go in the future. So I think that that's an exciting place to be. But this definition helps me see the difference. If we're using just multiple sources of different types of data, and it could be both qualitative and quantitative, but we aren't taking it to that next step of integration, then I would suggest that it is more in the bucket of multiple methods rather than mixed methods. I had the chance this morning to go down and have a look at the great posters that are being shown, and just a call out to folks to have a great look at the posters that are set up here in the lobby floor, that there's some great work being done, both qualitatively and quantitative. But I note that I hadn't yet seen a mixed methods example there. And I saw lots of great potential if that was ever of interest. So hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that and we can get our thinking forward for that. So let's talk about then integration as the heart and soul of mixed methods research. If we're not talking about integration, that we're probably not doing mixed methods. And that's the one thing that I wanted to mention. I wanted you to notice two things out of this discussion today, was this idea about integration is systematic and it's intentional. So we can't, if we don't plan for integration, then we can't expect integration to actually just happen. So it's that intentionality idea, or the considered combination in this definition that's being showed. The other thing I wanted to mention is that it can occur at different levels. And when we talk about different levels, it can happen at the sampling, for example, if you want to use mixed methods to connect different samples or even find different samples using one data source, you can integrate at the data collection, more of the design level in terms of using mixed methods for building. Let's say you're building an instrument that didn't exist and you're using data in order to support that. And of course, analysis. And analysis is where we see a lot of work being done right now. And so, for example, we might be wanting to merge or compare and contrast. We might be wanting to look for those areas of divergence between the qualitative and the quantitative. One of the situations that I see a lot when I work in research teams is the idea that the research teams may have a qualitative and a quantitative component. and then they go to integrate it. And when they haven't had conversations from either the design stage or during the data collection, then sometimes the questions then is, how do we integrate? And the idea is, okay, if we can be more intentional about what our plan is for integration, then it's more likely that we can make integration happen, as I hope that we might have intended in that way. So we can talk a little bit about that. But you'll notice here that I finished the slide with intensities. And this is something that, that I just want to draw upon before we get too much into the health science research types of kind of examples. And this is a little bit of a Cherylism, but I see integration as a continuum of intensity. And the Merit Group knows I've talked about this before. But it's this idea about, if I open up a study or I look at a proposal or a grant or I look at an article, maybe I'm reviewing a mixed methods article. Sometimes I will actually flip to the findings and I'll have a quick look, and I'll look for, can I see the qualitative and the quantitative research or the findings? And if I see it where they are, for example, the metaphor of the ice cream there with some sprinkles on top. So let's say the quant is the ice cream, and then do I see a sprinkling in of qualitative? Well, that's a great start for mixed methods, and perhaps that's all you can do with the data that you've collected. And maybe that just helps you think about the ice cream as a story. You're using one maybe as a foundation and the other to help maybe make it more complete, maybe to explain things, maybe to do something that you couldn't have done with either the qual or the quant alone. So, but that means that that has gone beyond just the separate tables or the separate reporting of qualitative and quantitative. In the weaving, kind of in the mid intensity, I think about if I flip open an article or a grant or a proposal, and I see that there's going to be the intentionality to actually bring those two together. Maybe it's that they want to find some what we would call meta inferences, which means understandings that were representative of bringing the two together at that time. And so maybe I see a discussion that's actually organized by the four meta inferences. And in those meta inferences, they're going to talk about them, they're going to put the findings right in there, and then they're going to discuss those findings. Well, that's a little bit more intense of integration, and it is more of a weaving together. And then the FIRE one is where I think is some of the most interesting work happening at this moment in time. And I think it represents where perhaps we actually can't see the separate qualitative and quantitative anymore. Maybe the data has been transformed to be, and I wonder about if we're going to have at some point a category of mixed data, and then that's the idea where it's been a chemical reaction and you actually can't separate the two anymore. And so I want to be upfront that I actually don't think higher intensity is better. It's just different. And it allows us to kind of speak about different ways of doing mixed methods. In some of my work, like I mentioned, I might only be able to do the sprinkling because that's all that's appropriate for what we've done. And maybe that's my intention. Or if I start out and I want to integrate more in a way of a higher intensity in weaving, that I can be more upfront about the ways that I am going to and intending to integrate it. So I find that this intensity piece can give us a language for kind of how we're using the qual, the quant, and how we're actually intending to achieve the integration.
Great. Thanks, Cheryl. So why is there this kind of proliferation of mixed method studies in the health sciences or health services research? Now we have courses that are specific to mixed methods in health services. When I did my PhD, greater than 10 years ago now, I actually had to go outside of my home department at OISE at U of T to the Department of Curriculum Teaching and Learning to take a mixed methods course. And so I think the answer is because mixed methods is particularly useful for addressing these complex, multi-level problems that are inherent in health sciences research and health services research, to address those wicked problems, as Donna Mertens refers to them as. I think there's no better recent example than the COVID-19 pandemic, right? We're all familiar with seeing those maps where we'd see proportions of vaccination rates, high and low, and there were those questions around, well, what are the drivers between those high and low rates? And in using mixed methods, we would be able to answer those questions and develop timely solutions. So health researchers might explore possibilities for mixed methods in a variety of practices in their research, clinical, and teaching practices. I know a recent example in my research practice, for example, a few years ago, we wrapped up the completion of an evaluation of a Ontario-based peer support program for individuals with brain injury. We conducted a pilot feasibility trial with an embedded qualitative strand. The results of the trial showed that we didn't have significant results for our primary outcome, but in combination with the qualitative results, which were quite positive, we were able to hypothesize some reasons why we weren't, seeing a signal with respect to the primary outcome, which was community integration. And Cheryl, I think you're going to speak to some of the relevance in teaching practices and clinical practices.
Sure. And so I'm thinking about both what Dr. Shabino talked about around different ways of knowing. And I think about that in terms of in a clinical practice as a different ways of indicating whether something is working or not. In the posters that I just finished look at, I saw great lots of clinical indicators that are used to help us understand what's going on with different interventions and different treatments. I saw lots of great work in terms of using our instruments that have been validated. I saw some studies on even validation of different instruments, perhaps for other populations. And I want to be upfront as well by the fact that those are great studies and they're great standalone studies and they give us important information. But have you ever finished a study where you wondered? I looked at a pattern. I looked at, maybe I didn't find significance where I expected to find significance. Maybe there was group differences that I wanted to actually are nuanced. Maybe that the instruments haven't been used in a particular population and I want to know whether or not it's useful for them. Well, that's where a complementary other way, and so in this example, it would be a qualitative component, might be able to help you understand perhaps the quality of life, the experience of folks, the adherence, the level of adherence, or reasons why they did or didn't. And I'd like to push us to think a little bit beyond the open comments on a survey. That is one way of being able, and sometimes what's really cool about that is those surveys can start us off in that kind of direction. And maybe it even helps you identify that there's a particular sample that you want to know. And when I think about the diverse populations in which our health services are meeting, that there are many populations that haven't been adequately studied or understood as well. And I think about same as different diagnoses. And so one of the ways that I've seen mixed methods really be able to play an important role is giving voice to perhaps low incident populations, where we sometimes say is similar or different than this, and maybe even a little bit of a move. I mean, there's been lots of work in mixed methods with randomized control trials and using some embedded different ways of being able to capture information. We are, limited to how people can express themselves in our surveys and in our diagnostic instruments. And perhaps something doesn't fit into a category in the same way as perhaps it did in the past, or maybe we even need to update some of our instruments and have a way forward. Those are all real practical ways. And I'm saying that some of this work has been done without being called mixed methods. But what mixed methods does is it can provide you a framework in order to, and maybe even some new practices or strategies. The field of mixed methods has existed for a long time, but yet I would say our access to guidance and the health sciences is really leading the way in many respects in the field of mixed methods. But what we find is just sometimes the ways that methods are reported in some of our journals, we have less space, and so sometimes we don't get the same amount of depth or detail. And so I do want to kind of encourage us to think about being explicit about how we're integrating and our intentionality in terms of that. When we think about those kind of clinical practices, it will help us to understand how things are working for not just the general population, but maybe for specific populations, or why something's not working, or maybe it is working, but maybe the indicators just aren't as sensitive as what they could be. And then I wanted to mention about our instructional practices. I saw several in the posters talking about here that you have psychology practicums, you have faculty who are taking on teaching responsibilities, and sometimes you want information about how well and is this working for my different populations in which I'm teaching, and in what ways is it working or not working. And so in the HPE literature, then we can see some examples about how that is working or non-working, or not working as well as maybe what we would like it to. And sometimes we can use our assessments, but we actually want to know more about how it's working or not working as well for different folks. I want to connect this a little bit to some of the work that Merit has been taking on, in that we have been talking a lot about how who we are, what we study, influences how we approach our research. And so there was a time, where we would identify ourselves, and maybe there still is here in terms of I'm more of a qualitative or I'm more of a quantitative researcher, or perhaps my population needs this, or perhaps it's about that the topic area has been studied in this way and hasn't been studied in that way. And so there are some opportunities for being able to identify a topical gap as well as a methodological gap. And in some of the work that I saw in scoping reviews and systematic reviews, that can help you to even elevate and be able to make your argument for being able to how to study something in a particular way. But we are who we are. And so often mixed methods will be done in teams, and it can be a great way to, let's say you don't have a background in qual and you want to maybe learn a little bit. So you can do a more qualitatively oriented mixed methods, or you can do a more quantitatively oriented mixed methods. So sometimes it does allow you to kind of begin to bridge maybe something that needs to be done in your field, but perhaps you don't have the capacity to do that. And that's been a really lovely way of us having some of those discussions at Merit. And some of the work that has been done there is we've started looking at some of the HB literature and looking at how mixed methods studies are being reported and what other information would be helpful in an effort to provide some real guidance about what should be in grants, what should be in terms of methodological details. And that can be really helpful.
Cheryl, do you want to pause for any questions
Yeah.
at this point?
We're good.
Are
Okay.
we okay? Okay, excellent. Thanks, Cheryl. I think so. With that, I'm going to share, my mixed methods journey. And I wasn't always a mixed methods researcher. In fact, I came from a very quantitative background. For my master's, I used the Canadian Community Health Survey. So I did data analysis at the research data center at Robarts at U of T. And I always knew that I did want to pursue a PhD. So I was able to leverage this experience with big data to work for a few years with a really great epidemiologist and health services researcher, Dr. Susan Jaglal, who became my PhD supervisor. So I worked for her for a year and a bit. We did a series of studies with some other great colleagues on the epidemiology of health service use among individuals with spinal cord injury. And at that time, Dr. Jaglal was hosting a planning meeting on self-management. And one of the participants of that meeting spoke to the need for a specialized program, specialized self-management program for people with spinal cord injuries. So that really sparked my interest in pursuing that particular idea as part of my PhD. And I knew that, that quantitative background that I was very familiar with and comfortable with would not be sufficient to pursue the question and address this particular problem that I wanted to address. So I knew that I needed to expand my worldviews, my methodology. So as cheesy as it sounds, I often say that mixed methods chose me. So these are some of the outputs of my PhD. I conducted an exploratory sequential study, and I wanted specifically to determine the implementation considerations for this specialized program. As I mentioned, I took a single mixed methods class in the Department of Curriculum Teaching and Learning. There was not a course in my home department. And I published within the structure of that graduate program. I published the individual results, the individual qual and quant results from my PhD. But in my discussion chapter, I did integrate the qual and quan findings, as you can see here, and this was published or written in 2014, pre-2014. So really, we're just sort of starting to talk about joint displays, and it took me a few more years, some more reading, really to develop this greater awareness and appreciation of the levels of integration that Cheryl spoke about. So, integration at the level of data collection, at the level of sampling, analysis, etc. So I hung on to this idea that I would publish the integrated results, despite having published the individual qual and quan results. So this was published in the Journal of Mixed Methods Research just in 2020. There was a couple of mat leaves in between. But this was this opportunity to disseminate the content or the merged findings for that specialized or tailored self-management program. It was really exciting to me. It was also an opportunity to make a methodological contribution to the field, because there was that need beyond the content of what should go into this program. There was a need to because the other papers had been published, to think about how I would recraft the message here. So this, as I say, this was the paper that was published in JMMR in 2020, along with Dr. Jaglal and Dr. Guterman. As part of this paper, you will see it in the field. We often include these procedural diagrams, figures, maps to highlight these areas of integration. And actually, at this time, I actually work quite closely with one of the EICs, Dr. Mike Fetters, to develop the paper. And I certainly felt very, very fortunate to do so. So this figure was included, highlighting the conceptual steps of the methodology that were followed to develop a complex health intervention. And again, really highlighting those levels of integration. I think with that, turn
If I
back to-
can, let's
Yeah.
just stay back here
yeah,
for just a brief moment, because I want to point out a couple of things here. Is just the idea that we started, it was exploratory. So this is an exploratory sequential design, meaning that we started with the qualitative data and used it to help explore the concepts to then develop an instrument. And then you actually use the instrument and then you merged it. So, this is this could be a program of research as well. And so I just want to highlight that not everything has to be within one study. It could be that you're building this over time, or maybe you've done things qualitatively and then you want to add a quantitative component. But I really like the way that you talked about then making sure that you get a chance to also leverage what those two different things are bringing if you put them together and able to understand. And so in this way, you were able to understand what your intervention was doing in a more robust way than was accessible by qual or quant.
Absolutely. And certainly with, kind of the luxury of time, I talked about, being able to really, really appreciate all of those levels. So in fact, Cheryl, as you, highlighted and emphasized, so that I'd use that first qualitative component or strand to build or develop or create this survey to prioritize the preferences and needs. To kind of go into a bit more detail in some of the later slides, but I was really sort of starting from this exploratory phase. It just didn't make sense to start with a survey. That it was really, grounded in, patient and caregiver preferences to build this program.
So I'd like to now leverage this example in some of our discussions. And so what we hear from folks, and this was actually, this paper came out of, as I had the pleasure of working with a number, being keynote at a conference of nurses working in Brazil. And it drew from kind of Latin America. And what we found when we were there is that there was just a lack of guidance about what are the things that I must have in our articles in order to meet the quality piece that we're thinking about evidence of integration these days. And so we put together, and it's just kind of coming out shortly, but this was a collaborative effort. And I want to walk you through this because where we started was this idea about you actually need to adopt a mindset that centers on integration. So to me, that's that intentionality. It's the thinking. It's the moving beyond, being able to see what we talk about in a recent paper with another merit scientist, Dr. Akay, was about this idea of what does it mean to be able to see the world in a pluralistic way? Dialectical pluralism is a paradigm that's been talked about what allows me to kind of put aside or at least expand maybe some of the ways that I've seen. And I've seen that development in my own. I also came from very much of a quantitative background in the natural sciences. And then when I started working more, with people is I really came to appreciate the need for experiences and perspectives and voices. And so I spent several years developing a qualitative program. And so being upfront about that, I still do quant studies, I still do qual studies, and then I have a program of research that I would consider as being mixed methods because I study learning environments. And so to me, though, that naturally kind of fits within it in different ways. And so that idea about a mindset is, people often talk about how do I actually get there to have a mindset? Well, here's a few ways that can help you get started on a mindset. Think about how the essential integration practices are similar and different from what you might know about research, drawing upon the expertise of one or the other or different research approaches. Consider what evidence of integration might look like across the different essential integration practices, and we'll talk about the other 8. Use visuals. And so we saw an example there of a visual, and even making even explicit some of our practices now are using designs about what and how is integration happening. and then read published mixed methods health studies. The challenges, of course, is that, there's still more of a mix of probably of different ways in which sometimes things are published that have some aspects and not others. But I have a hope for the future that we'll have a little bit more of a shared understanding of what it means to be quality. And Sarah's leading recently submitted a grant to CIHR in order to be able to kind of revisit some of the quality indicators in light of what we are now understanding about integration. So it's kind of crazy when we think about, mixed methods has gotten this far without a lot of talk or strategies or practical guidance in doing integration. But I think we kind of had to get to the place where we all agreed that maybe integration was the defining characteristic. And I think we are, in many ways farther along than we used to be. So let's walk through then these other 8 practices. And so do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, so one area just to start, or we can start with identifying, of course, a research problem that is appropriate for mixed methods research. So for in the example that I provided, there were of course, gaps in tailored programming for individuals with spinal cord injury. When I was launching my Ph.D. Dissertation, there was actually a qualitative study that was published by some Canadian colleagues on the experiences of individuals with neurological conditions. So I think it was stroke, MS, and spinal cord injury, their experiences with a traditional self-management program. And they determined that the individuals with spinal cord injury actually had the least satisfaction with the self-management program, because the program just was not, of course, adapted to their needs. Talked about, the workbook gave examples of, walking on the beach, et cetera. So this really, for me, was very timely and really opened the door to the need for the work that I was about to embark on. That there was still there was this qualitative study, but there was more to explore. And I'll just add, Cheryl, that I love this idea of this intentionality. And back when I was doing my PhD work, I had this certainly awareness, but not like who I was then as a mixed methods researcher versus now obviously has evolved so much as has the field. And I had that awareness, but there is that intentionality now, even thinking about, well, what might that joint display look like, thinking about that at the beginning of the study. So I just wanted to add some of those reflections. I'll talk about the objectives. So the overall objective. So we talk about a mixed methods objective, and then including your specific quant and qual objectives. So here it was to build again a tailored program for people with spinal cord injury by first identifying their perspectives of self-management as well as barriers and facilitators, and then to build, and we use that term build very specifically, to prioritize their needs and preferences. So in this, there's a lot in this mixed methods objective, right? It suggests both quant and qual components or strands, as well as integration. And I'll say that I mentioned I co-teach the mixed methods in health services course at IHPME, and my great colleague, Dr. Katie Dainty, and I, we recently added a whole session on objectives, because there is so much thought and consideration that goes into developing a mixed methods question to consider all of these components.
And so this is where then, in your grants and in your write-ups of things, if you can put in some of the emphasis on integration, then again, it makes that intentionality more known. So far we've talked about in your research problem setup, you want to talk about for the need for why this integration will help you address the problem in which you're studying. Then we've got the objective that then takes it to the next step, and is also can't be answered by kind of qualitative or quantitative alone. And then it leads us to kind of begin to look at a research question and a design. And so, for example, this in Sarah's work, it happened to be an exploratory sequential, but there are mixed methods design, but there are lots of other designs that can be used, and maybe they don't have a fancy label to them, but it is that idea about where is the integration happening. And in this one, the exploratory tells us the intentionality for why we are mixing, and the sequential tells us that it is one phase followed by the other phase. And then we look at when we talk about the implement your qualitative and your quantitative data procedures according to established standards of rigor, it does mean that if I'm doing semi-structured interviews, if I'm doing an online survey, if I'm using a validated instrument, then we still have to meet the standards in the qual and the quan, but maybe there's some give on the sample size, or there's things like that, but we still have to meet standards of rigor for both the qual and the quan. So I think that that's important. You might have one being more dominant or leading, but it is just that idea that that having other expertise to kind of help you out with that can be really helpful. If the qual and the quant are not, they don't have to stand alone necessarily, but if they're not following the standards of rigor, then it doesn't actually set you up for doing a robust and high quality mixed method study.
Great. And I'll just conclude this slide at least with saying that, of course, we want to, generate and discuss meta inferences. So in my example, those meta inferences informed the recommendations, the specific recommendations for the program. I'll say too that it was a few years ago when I co-wrote a mixed methods analysis book chapter, and it was in that process that I realized that those joint displays are both a way to present your merged findings, but also a tool to help you develop those meta inferences. So that was a bit of an aha moment for me, because as Cheryl was saying too, we're now getting to a point in the field where we're starting to codify that process for how do we actually come up with these meta inferences. Go on to next slide. As we wind down the talk, there's a lot of options for presenting your mixed methods research. This is a question that comes up a lot. Students are very curious in the course that we teach about. So how do you do this? How do you publish your mixed methods research? So some of these recommendations might be more appropriate in the context of a graduate degree because of the constraints, I'll say, or parameters of a 3 or 4 paper thesis. You might choose to publish the individual quant and qual papers in separate journals, but make links to those papers. You might publish the papers as a series, so in the same journal. You might, as I did, publish the separate papers, but then have this merged, this paper where you do present the integrated results, and think about how that is recrafted. So in my case, this the focus for that paper that I showed you in JMMR was as a methodological contribution. There's some interesting talk too about, you might not have the opportunity to present it, or to publish your merged findings, but there's some other creative options. So to create some online forums to present that work. As we wind down, Cheryl, tease this. I think I'll sort of finish with the end. Integration. If you leave with nothing else from this talk, integration is the heart and soul of mixed methods research, and it's heartening to see that researchers, clinician researchers, and students are wanting to do this well, and looking to guidance to do this well. One of the most cited reporting guidelines is the GRAMS, led by Alicia O'Kane, but it was published in 2008. So that is at this point more than 15 years old. The field is just advancing sort of exponentially. So as Cheryl mentioned, we have submitted a grant with some other wonderful colleagues to update the GRAMS so that it is in line with current integration practices, really to promote this quality of reporting that is so essential. So that we can, mixed methods is a very powerful tool, and we want to make sure that it's done in the right way. It's done meaningful, and so that's part of the aim with that proposal and intent. Again, as we wind down, we'll say that as clinicians, as clinician researchers, you already have a great start. You are used to taking, quantitative data and merging it with qualitative information. So you're, regularly, doing meta inferences. So, we believe you have a great head start. And so with that, we'll conclude our talk, and we'd love to hear from both the audience in the room as well as those online. And Cheryl, I don't know if you had any other kind of concluding thoughts? No? Great.
We'll look first to that there aren't any questions
Yes.
so far.
Okay. Okay,
So
great.
We'll pause for a second and
Yeah.
open it up to anybody. Anybody surprised by anything that we talked about?
Yeah. Well, is anyone surprised? They should go first.
No, that's fine.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, not a surprise. Thank you for reviewing the reviewing all of that and sharing your story, Sarah, as well. I did have a thought more about the 9 steps that you presented on that slide, and you nicely integrated that with your lived experience. But I feel like there's a step 0 in terms of adopt a mindset, because I'm wondering, maybe this is what do we risk by not approaching a mindset that centers on integration in health professions or health research? And maybe extension of that, are there risks to adopting a methodology or a mindset when we don't come from integration as a comfort space? Does that make sense? Like, so choosing to move into the integration, but we don't have that level of comfort with complexity. But then on the flip side, what do we risk as a field for not learning about complexity and integration?
That's a great question. Sure, I think there's always a risk, as we get into thinking about different methodologies, for sure. I guess I would probably say that there is, as I mentioned, particularly maybe with folks working in teams, that if you don't have that integration discussion, or if folks aren't, maybe it's more of a commitment maybe to integration, or the idea of exploring the possibilities maybe of integration. It might be a more comfortable way of being able to say it. Mm-hmm. Maybe centers is too strong of that idea. So thank you. It is the idea of, we used to talk about integration as more of something that would happen. And then we were surprised when it didn't. So I think it also allows us to think about, I think a lot about the use of existing data as well in data sets. And thinking about, we had a great discussion yesterday about, well, what data can be integrated? What data should we be integrating? And what data, doesn't actually work? And so I think a lot about, we didn't talk too much about that today, but what's your relationship among your samples of the data, and how you justify actually that integration? We can't integrate all kinds of data. So how do we do that in a mindful way? So no, thanks. That was a great question.
Yeah, I'll say, yeah, I agree. A great question. Very thoughtful question. I think, I mean, I think of my example, of course, and I think I had shared uh, too, in sort of the description of it or the build up. Like I could have, um, I could have done just a qualitative, or I'll say a qualitative study alone, or a quantitative study alone, and it would have felt, of course, incomplete for the purpose that I had, right? Um, and I really felt, you know, fortunate, and that it was the appropriate design, because this was the work, the program that was developed, and this, I'm proud to say that the program was indeed developed, was really rooted in, patient and caregiver voices, right? And now we're having, of course, a lot more discussions around, patient engagement, patient centeredness, if you adopt that term, patient engagement. And I really, I think that's one of the strengths of this work, is that it's rooted in the experiences and preferences of people with lived experiences. Um, Cheryl and I were talking a bit too about, capacity in mixed methods research as well. And, there is this need, there's this recognition of its importance, but do we have enough capacity in the field to do this work meaningfully? And I'd argue we do have a ways to go. So some of my reflections.
I know we
there.
have to be
Yeah,
careful of,
yeah,
of the time, and
yeah.
we know that
Yeah.
some people will need to go, but sure. Do you want to give up the mic
Yeah,
for folks, and then we'll.
yes.
Thanks. Thanks for a fantastic session. I'm going to put my clinical hat on as a
Yeah.
VP Ed over here, and when you sit around the hospital leadership tables, you often get tons and tons of data, very quantitative data, saying, why is the discharge rate low? Why is the length of stay so long? And you'll get quantitative data saying, oh, like, it's 21 days as an average or whatever. But I'm almost thinking, like, if there's a way to actually implement the qualitative part, because often, it's hard to, then you're kind of assuming type of answers, and you think, like, okay, it's because of this, or maybe because it's because of that, but don't really have a great perspective of, for example, the patient, the family, or actually the healthcare workers up on that ward who are working there. But to do an extended length qualitative study would be really difficult to do. So I'm just thinking, is there a practical way of perhaps trying to combine the mixed methods model in a hospital setting to make it practical for actually clinical implementation, where you actually hear the patient's voice, but perhaps, it's not a full extended study?
Yeah, I can offer some reflections. It's a great question. Your question calls to mind some your question calls to mind just the work in the learning health system space, and when we talk about data and indicators, often quantitative data, right? And I think there's her name is escaping me, but there's a really talented UK psychologist who had done some work, who had done a qualitative study, and asking clients or patients, about data in this context, in a learning health system context. And there was some really interesting discussion about what is data in this context. And what came out of that work is the need to include and incorporate patient stories as in this context, in a learning health system context. So I think that's challenging. It's challenging to include those stories, qualitative information, and then marry that with quantitative data. I I don't have the answer, but I would like to see us get there, where, we can use those stories and, monitor them and sort of rapidly iterate and pivot.
I do think
Yeah.
that there's some opportunities with technology
Yeah.
to help us collect. There's also some techniques that of rapid qualitative analysis. There's some ways of being able to ask questions that can allow you access to the information in which you're looking for. And I do think one of the things that you're talking about is that how do you even integrate across perspectives in order, and that could be again, it's collecting more than one perspective, and then that will help the clinician make a judgment, based on that. So I do think that there are some techniques, there might be some areas in which the methodology actually also needs a proof of concept and some guidance, and what types of questions would help and what questions, so I think there could be some real work that could happen there. I don't have a protocol available to you at the top of my head, but certainly I would imagine that there's some out there in the literature as well to at least get us started.
Thank you.
And then,
This question may not come as a surprise to some people, but I've been trying to think through a lot of the visuals that we use in qualitative research. Cheryl's nodding. To do our analysis, and I think Jonathan has pointed this out too, is that we get stuck a lot in like little Venn diagram type things that show overlap between different concepts. And I see a lot the table form for the joint display. And I think my curiosity is, from your perspective, like what the table affords, like for sure comparison, but definitely maybe also like a listing of themes that we often see in qualitative research from thematic analysis type perspectives. So I'm curious about what the affordances are, what the places you get stuck with those tables are, and what the alternatives you see tend to be.
well, we did share a couple of examples of like circular almost figures, and so I do think things don't have to be in a square display in that way. And it definitely uses the word display rather than table on purpose, because I think we're just at the cusp of some really interesting work, and all we need is people like you to actually spice up the way that we are visually displaying. But what the joint display, the purpose of it is actually to make it more explicit about what data is being used to generate what. And so we often talked about mixed methods as doing something new, but we're actually now almost like, taking the black box and opening it up and having a look and being able to see the mechanisms that people have been using. And then I think we can get better at displaying the actual evidence and even become more creative in that way, for sure. And I've seen some great work even using creative methods of data collection, and they naturally lend themselves or don't fit into the columns and into the boxes of a table. And so I think that that's an exciting way too.
If I can add, yeah, Cheryl, my head was going in a similar direction in terms of it's really exciting in the field to see, creative examples of joint displays. I think there's, Dr. Tim Guterman even talks about, interactive joint displays, which is really, really exciting. I guess I know we're short on time, but the final thing I'll say is, Cheryl, I really appreciated your point around, with the definition of mixed methods, which originally included that term corroboration. I think the field has really moved away from, everything lining up just beautifully between the quant and the qual, and actually labeling the fit of the integration. So is there concordance or, or discordance or divergence? I know in Alicia O'Cathane's book on, the use of qualitative methods in RCTs, she includes some great examples of joint displays where those findings, those meta inferences are labeled, and I think that's really helpful. And so maybe the final thing I'll say is I think there's space, as an implementation scientist, the role of joint displays as a knowledge translation tool. Just I'll leave on that end. On that note, I think that's an exciting possibility too. Thank you.
So we've come up on time. I'll say thank you to those who have joined us online. For those who are here, a special thanks to Dr. Poth and Munce. I hope that you can enjoy the remainders of Learning Pillar Week here at St. Joe's as part of CERC. If you're continuing to be interested in what the education community at McMaster is involved in around scholarship, we'd invite you to check us out at merit.mcmaster.ca. Thanks and enjoy the rest of your day.